מוכנה?
מוכנה.
הליכה. תלכי לכיוון המטרות, תלכי.
אוקיי.
תלכי.
We want to finish him. We don't want to mess around.
אני בלגי ששירת בצה"ל, בדיוק.
And I think I made the right decision. I don't ever doubt it.
I think I'm a bit alone. That kind of people that I sent to Israel are Christian people who want to help the Jewish people because the Bible says so.
Записатися в ряди військовослужбовців.
In November 2013, a Ukrainian Jewish woman, Elena Zakusilo, appeared on a TV program in Ukraine. It was an entertainment interview show called Lie Detector, in which contestants' answers are monitored for being true or false.
Сколько лет в армии провели?
6.
6 лет? Вы профессиональный военный?
Да.
Вы продолжаете работать на израильские спецслужбы?
Да.
Вот, я даже теперь не знаю, что у вас спрашивать.
Я объясню, можно
Объясните.
В Борисполе есть израильская авиалиния при посольстве Израиля. И провожаю, встречаю пассажиров, которые заходят на этот сам трап.
То есть вы служите израильской армии в Украине?
Служба безопасности, израильская авиалиния. Чтобы туда не ехать. Это альтернатива, этим я могу заниматься.
Внимание, вопрос. Вы убивали людей?
Да.
Это правда.
Первого раза был очень большой стресс. Пошла. Помню, сейчас бросила этот автомат, сказала, никуда не пойду. Пошла.
Elena Zakusilo's appearance on Lie Detector triggered an Al Jazeera investigation into the subject of foreign nationals working for and volunteering in the Israeli army. The old powers of Britain and France sometimes employ foreign nationals, the British sometimes recruiting Commonwealth citizens, and France has the Foreign Legion. At the other end of the spectrum, mercenary activity is illegal for any South African. But Al Jazeera was interested in the way Israel encourages volunteers from the Jewish diaspora and beyond to serve in its army in both paid and unpaid roles. There are organizations that specialize in bringing people to Israel, some with branches in London, either as unpaid volunteers or paid soldiers. These groups often have branches across Europe and use their own networks, social media, websites, and the press to attract people to take part in a variety of programs. Al Jazeera made contact with a Norwegian journalist, Terje Lersalvesen, who'd already looked into this subject in Norway.
I became aware of an organization that was advertising in our newspaper. They were having several meetings with Israel on the agenda in prayer houses around where I lived. I decided to go to some of those meetings and listen to what they had to say. I was a bit surprised by the very harsh tone in some of what was said in those meetings. That was politics, which would, in other regions of the world, if other groups were involved, we would describe as a politics of ethnic cleansing. People were saying straight out that Israel should be cleansed for all Arabs. And this was a radical message that was spread in the prayer houses here.
You could argue that Israel is free to attract support of different kinds to its armed forces. And if volunteers want to respond to that call, it's up to them. But what surprises some is why volunteers might choose to join a force which is sometimes heavily criticized for its human rights violations.
Is it acceptable to see young people and even older people join the Israeli Defense Force, and for certain programs to be in place that encourage people to join the Israeli Defense Force? I think it's shocking, largely because if you read through the human rights abuses that have been conducted by them, and even the reports from Amnesty International, there is a clear violation. Why would you want to substantiate, or why would you want to encourage young people, or even older people, as I mentioned earlier, to be involved in such heinous crimes? It is sending out a very wrong message, and in the case of governments in Europe who claim to be fighting extremism at the same time, I think it's highly duplicitous, it is hypocritical, and it's contradictory to the work that they claim to be involved in, which is to stop people involved in violation of human rights.
One of the organizations operating internationally and offering non-combat support to the Israeli army is called Sarel.
No, it's not just Norway. I met a group from Finland as well when I was there, and some of the people in the Norwegian group were Swedish. And I know that there have been people from France, from the UK, from the United States. And Sarel is publishing statistics on all the nations participating on their webpage. It is not so well known, though. It's not secret, but it is not well known among the public.
Organizations like Sarel ask for money and moral support for the professional recruits known as lone soldiers. These lone soldiers are foreign nationals, usually but not always of Jewish descent, who come to Israel specifically to join the army as paid soldiers. When the State of Israel was declared in 1948, it turned to volunteers from abroad to fight in the First Arab-Israeli War. Mahal was an organization that recruited foreign troops at that time. Mahal served its purpose, but it has a present-day incarnation with a similar name, which recruits volunteers for different programs today, including combat roles. In 1948, several thousand volunteers arrived in Israel from all over the world to fight the Arab armies who'd entered Palestine. They were largely World War II veterans who'd fought in the Allied forces. The most effective were fighter pilots who formed 2/3 of the Israeli Air Force. When the war was over, most of the volunteers went back home, although some remained to become residents of Israel. The Lone Soldiers Center provides support to men and women in the army, but without family in Israel. Lone soldiers are non-Israelis serving in regular army units. They're effectively professional soldiers, receiving a salary from the army and the government. On its website, Sarel does not appear to recruit professional soldiers. But, in its own words, it encourages volunteers from around the world to come to Israel for a number of weeks to work in army warehouses and go on guided tours and attend lectures. Al Jazeera contacted Sarel, the Lone Soldier Center, and Mahal IDF volunteers in the UK to invite them to take part in this film. But they were non-committal and then stopped responding. The team made repeated attempts in both the UK and the Netherlands over 18 months to try to persuade these organizations to contribute to this film. But their efforts ultimately led nowhere. A member of the Al Jazeera team also applied to volunteer in the Israeli army through one of these programs, but received no reply. The team also tried to obtain the cooperation of branches of the organizations in France, but was again unsuccessful. There were too many obstacles, and the groups were very cautious in dealing with Al Jazeera. After 2 years of research, Al Jazeera was no closer to getting any of these organizations to take part in this film. So the team decided to shift the focus of the investigation and go to Israel to see if it could discover more about how volunteering operates there. They also tapped into Terje Lear-Salveson's knowledge and experience in Israel. He had accompanied a group of volunteers who'd signed up with Sarel in Norway. As part of their tour, they'd apparently visited a military training base.
When we were doing the story on the Sarel volunteer group, we had appointments with some of the volunteers in advance that we were going to follow and make part of our article. And we did that and we stuck to that agreement, but we had a big surprise when we came there. Suddenly, a very familiar face to us appeared in the group, and as a member of the group, she represented herself. Her name was Grete Kvelland Skåra, and she was the leader of a political group political party group in my hometown, Kristiansand, where the newspaper is published. At the same time we were in Israel, the city council back home were having their the year's most important meeting, the big budget meeting of the year. And the leader of the Christian Democratic group was absent without explanation, and we met her in an Israeli military base. So obviously we had to tell our editor where she was because we had spotted it. And he said, okay, you should write the story you wanted, and you should write this story as well. You have to ask her why she's there. When we were in Israel, she didn't want to give an interview. We came back, we published the first story, and then the day after we approached her again and say, okay, we have now written about what Sarel is. We have to ask you again about your involvement in this. Why were you there, and why did you prioritize this above the political budget meeting? And she didn't want to reply. She was the only person we met who didn't want to tell us about why she was there and her thoughts about the conflict. And she asked us not to publish, and we couldn't do that. So we published the story, and she just said no comment. And that, of course, led to further debate about Sarel and about her role specifically as a politician.
Getting film facilities in Israel wasn't easy for Al Jazeera, but the team eventually managed to find a way of hiring a foreign crew. They found an American crew willing to work with them and get round Israeli restrictions. They went with the team to a military camp called Caliber 3, which calls itself the leading counter-terror and security training academy in Israel. It also runs what it calls the ultimate tourist experience. It offers paintballing, survival training, and the shooting adventure.
We want to finish him. We don't want to mess around with him. We're not going in to play games with him. you can see that all the bullets are concentrated in the middle of the person. We're aiming to the let's say to the widest point, widest part of the body, okay, which is this part. We're going for the head just when we want to neutralize. That's how it works.
Start walking, walk! Buddy! Buddy!
Caliber 3 is in the occupied West Bank. It's used for training by the Israeli army. But it also offers these action days to foreign visitors.
Kafan! How did I stop myself? Babies, little steps.
It ranges from all ages to very young to very old. We have Jews and non-Jews alike. The groups vary. There's not any particular group that comes to this. It's people that are interested to understand a little bit more in detail what's counterterrorism and to understand the terrorist threat that Israel is facing on a daily basis. So it's all different kinds of people. I've taken survivors from the Holocaust. I've taken groups of old ladies from Texas who are not Jewish that support Israel and want to come and show their support for the soldiers and for the people who are fighting terrorism. So it ranges absolutely across the board.
Check our sights. All right. Hey. You're up.
Yeah. All right. Okay. This guy. Sort of. Left eye.
This group of American visitors seemed quite enthusiastic about their so-called shooting experience, including these newlyweds.
It's like a day trip after our wedding, I think, with the family. How do you feel when you fire a gun?
Empowered. Awesome. It's fun. Ran out too fast.
For two reasons, I really enjoy taking groups from overseas. The first reason is that I believe when you come and visit Israel, you need to understand what culture is over here. I know when I went to the States, I didn't want to go where the tourists went. I want to know where the locals would hang out, what they would eat, what music they'd listen to, what they'd do for entertainment. When you come to Israel, you need to understand that for us, counterterrorism isn't a game. It's not Xbox, it's not one of these movies. For us, counterterrorism is actually a way of life. Something that I'm not proud about is that my children have grown up with guns. I've got 4 kids, my youngest is 2, Yehuda. They've all grown up with guns. In fact, the gun that you saw me coming in with when I did the demonstration, I take that home with me. This gun never leaves me. In fact, the only time I put it in the safe is when I take a shower.
Caliber 3 is so popular with organized visitor groups that it gets regular mentions on a well-known tourist website. The reviews include photos and enthusiastic recommendations from satisfied customers. This one was from a volunteer who came here through Sar-El. Caliber 3 and its so-called insight into Israel's counter-terrorism was one of the highlights of this visitor's entire trip.
Can you tell me about the young people that come here? Are there children and teenagers that participate in the training, or
Yes, so often there are parents bring their children and also expose them to this program. Obviously, we do it all with supervision. Everything that happens on the ranges, especially with live ammunition. Telling us where to go. By the time we find it, you're exhausted.
In regard to recruitment programs and projects that are being conducted in Europe, and I have realized that some of them are not just aiming at European Jews, they're also aimed at non-Jewish communities. Well, I find it deeply concerning and shocking that such projects are allowed to exist in Europe.
Coming up in part 2, Israeli lone soldiers who came as volunteers from abroad and found themselves fighting in the 2014 attacks on Gaza.
It happened in the middle of a college class in university in South Africa. And I just ran out of the classroom to go and join the RDF, and I absolutely loved it. And I think I made the right decision. I don't ever doubt it.
But unpaid volunteers are not always of Jewish descent.
These are Norwegian Christian people. They come from different congregations. These people, they believe that Jesus will not come back before all the Jews of the world has been gathered in the Holy Land again. And they see it as their task to help speed up this process.
An Al Jazeera team is looking at foreign nationals who join the Israeli army, either as short-term unpaid volunteers or as longer-term paid professionals called lone soldiers. The subject was brought into sharp focus in July 2014 during the Israeli attacks on Gaza. On Sunday, the 20th of July, two Americans, 21-year-old Max Steinberg from Los Angeles and 24-year-old Sean Carmely from Texas, were killed in Gaza. Both were dual American-Israeli citizens, and both were lone soldiers. On the same day, a French Israeli, Jordan Bensamhoun, became the third lone soldier to be killed in the Gaza attacks. Sergeant Sahar Elbaz also made the news. He was an American lone soldier who was later awarded the Israeli Army's Citation of Bravery for killing 4 Hamas fighters in Gaza in 2014. He fought in the elite Givati Brigade. Al Jazeera eventually made contact with a group of lone soldiers of different nationalities. They all said that they'd received training in professional Israeli combat units and had taken part in the 2014 attacks on Gaza. 3 of them agreed to be interviewed on condition that their identities and real names be concealed. They were from Belgium, Mexico, and South Africa.
קודם כל עשיתי 8 חודשים של הכשרה של אימונים כדי להיות חייל קרבי. אחרי זה הייתי בחברון במשך 17 יום כשהייתה את החטיפה של 3 נערים. ישר אחרי זה נלחמתי בצוק איתן בעזה, ואחרי זה הייתי חצי שנה בחברון, אחרי זה 3 חודשים אימונים בדרום, ועכשיו אני בסיני. כיף. כיף מאוד.
טוב, שמי דן, עולה ממקסיקו, הייתי בצה"ל בשריון והייתי גם במלחמה האחרונה בצוק איתן.
I'm a South African. I was in the RDF as a lone soldier. It's a funny story how I wanted to join the army. When I was a child, we had a movie called Raid on Entebbe, which was the operation in Entebbe in 1976 when Israeli commandos went to Entebbe to rescue hostages taken by a Palestinian faction group. And because of that movie, I felt one day I want to be a hero like that, go and rescue hostages abroad. Of course, it was a very small dream. I didn't know much about it. It happened in the middle of a college class in university in South Africa, and I just ran out of the classroom to go and join the RDF. I didn't know what I was doing. I looked on Google, and you have a lot of interesting websites when you search how to join the RDF. I got in contact with various groups through the internet, giving me information about the IDF, but they said you have to be in Israel in order to do this. This isn't something you could do over the phone, this isn't something you could do over the internet, so it was a big leap in order to move my entire life there, to go to something I wasn't sure about.
אני עליתי מבלגיה, נולדתי בבלגיה, סיימתי 12 שנות לימוד בבלגיה, ואחרי זה עליתי לארץ בגלל ציונות. רק ציונות, אני אוהב את המדינה הזאת, סבא שלי ניצול שואה, ולהיות פה וללבוש מדי צה"ל זה בשבילי נקמה. אני בלגי ששירת בצה"ל, בדיוק.
המשפחה, איך הגיבה? בהתחלה היה בטח את הדאגה. אמא שלי, ככל אמא, לא, אל תלך לקרבי, אני דואגת, בבקשה, לך לג'ובניק, תעשה תודעי, יש מלא דרכים יותר טובים, תלמד משהו, תבקש פטור מצבא. ואז אני הסברתי לה שלא, הרצון שלי זה להיות קרבי.
The process to join the army is pretty lengthy, especially if you're coming from overseas. They have to do a fortune of background checks, but the whole process was a journey. As is everything, the journey is worth it, and I absolutely loved it, and I think I made the right decision. I don't ever doubt it.
Some critics have labelled lone soldiers as mercenaries, but is this strictly accurate? A 2001 UN convention prohibits the recruitment, training, use and financing of mercenaries. It also specifies that they must be, quote, motivated essentially by significant private gain and the promise of payment. In their interviews, these lone soldiers appear to be drawn to Israel for different reasons.
In regards to volunteers who joined the IDF, if they're getting paid, then yes, they could be considered and labelled as mercenaries. But that term normally applies to professional soldiers who actually get paid to participate in wars abroad. But in the case of, let's say, British Jews, that most of these will never have had any kind of formal training. If they have had formal training and were part of an army before and they're getting paid to join the IDF, the argument, I suppose, could be levelled against them.
There's clearly a debate about whether the Israeli recruits are mercenaries and how much they're paid, either by the army or the government. But it's important to note the lengths to which the Israeli military now goes to maintain the image of Israel not just as a homeland, but as a state under constant threat from hostile neighbours, including the Palestinians. Israel Defense Ministry figures show that lone soldiers come from many countries, but that the US, Russia and the Ukraine are the major sources, contributing 44%. Although numbers may be increasing, lone soldiers actually make up a relatively small proportion of the army as a whole. The Knesset's Research and Information Unit's figures show there's been a steady increase in the recruitment of lone soldiers since 2002, but they still only make up around 3% of total forces. What seems more compelling are the factors that draw Jews from the diaspora to volunteer for the Israeli army, but also the part played by non-Jews in helping Israel maintain its powerful influence abroad, all of which reinforces stereotypes globally about the threat posed by hostile elements in the Middle East. Al Jazeera asked the head of Sarel in Norway why other members of his organization were so reluctant to appear on camera to talk about any of this.
It has been very hard for me to talk to anybody involved in Israel and in Britain or whatever. They're just not interested. Why do you think that is, and why are you so much more sort of open to talking about it?
I think sorry people don't want to talk to journalists because they are used to people writing about them. It's happened so many times. I see it different because I think to have knowledge about Sorel spread is doing good for Sorel. And I don't fear the journalists as much as some people I know do.
Torgeir Dahl is a Christian who has served as a volunteer in the Israeli army several times.
First time I took on an Israeli uniform. And I thought when I went out I would look like a geek, somebody would laugh their head off. The first thing that happened was an Israeli scholar officer came up to me and asked me directions. I was so happy.
Dahl then became responsible for running Sorel across Scandinavia.
Sorel is the first part of the IDF, a military organization, and it's a civil organization. The civil organization organizes volunteers all over the world and get them to Israel. And when they come to Israel, the IDF Sorel takes over. And our work is to organize volunteers working on bases in IDF. Most of my volunteers are older Norwegian, comes from the western coast, south coast. They are very Christian. They come to go to Israel to help Israel because the Bible says so. I have some young people, not enough, but I want more. What I want is to get into the Swedish and Danish people, because I represent Sorel in Sweden and Denmark too.
And presumably, you're saying, are there any Jewish people from Norway or Scandinavia in the program, or are they all Christian?
Of course you have Jews too. Not that many, because as you might know, Norway, there is not that much Jews, around 1,000. That's all. I've sent a few Jews from Sweden and from Denmark.
These are Norwegian Christian people. They come from different congregations. These people, they believe that Jesus will not come back before all the Jews of the world has been gathered in the Holy Land again. And they see it as their task to help speed up this process.
I think I'm a bit alone. That kind of people that I send to Israel are Christian people who want to help the Jewish people because the Bible says so. And I think a lot of these people think that the West Bank should belong to Israel. They agree with the present government in Israel.
Torgeir Dahl was asked what kind of jobs the volunteers he sends are asked to do.
Maintenance, mostly maintenance, packing medicines, repairing things, painting, those kind of things. I worked on trucks and worked on medical supplies mostly.
And on weapons, you fix weapons?
No.
Never. No one ever does have anything to do.
I cannot tell for sure if nobody ever fixed weapons, but as far as I know, well, I worked on tanks, and that's a weapon, all right. So yes, I've been repairing these tanks.
So if you look back at the history of Israel, from the First War in 1948, since the establishment of the state, you'll find that many soldiers from outside of Israel came to fight, and those numbers were the numbers that were very influential and great numbers, obviously. And they had a huge influence on turning the war into a victory. And from then it's been a tradition, as well as the great importance, to have people coming from overseas in order to serve the RDF.
The young soldiers, they are so surprised that we go out and work with no pay and live as they do in those terrible quarters. I mean, it's not a five-star hotel. So they're very surprised, and they cannot understand why we do it, the young soldiers. But I think they're grateful.
In Norway, it was an article that was read very differently depending on the view people have on the Israel-Palestine conflict from before. So where some people saw firm old people with a strong faith, other people saw religious fanatics. We had a parliamentarian from the Labour Party who was comparing these people with the volunteers who go and join the Islamic State in Syria.
Comparing volunteers from abroad who perform combat and non-combat roles in the Israeli army with those who decide to go and fight for ISIL in Syria is complex. Europeans who've joined other groups in Syria have found themselves in trouble in their own countries.
Yusuf, and the other one was called Ahmed. These are their surnames. They both came from the city of Birmingham, and they went out to Syria. And they didn't actually participate in the war, but they went out initially with the intention of fighting against Bashar al-Assad. In the end, after speaking to their solicitors, what I gathered was the fact that they were involved in really removing injured casualties from the war front. But they were both convicted and have been sentenced to 13 years each, which is quite a heavy sentence. So there is a discrepancy. So for instance, you can go out to Syria and fight for humanitarian reasons and defend civilians from a dictator, and you risk prosecution by the British government. However, if you are a British Jew who has double or dual nationality, you can go out and fight with the Israeli Defense Force, which has a record, and a pretty notorious record and reputation for mistreating and abusing human rights of civilian populations. How does that make sense?
It's very different. In Israel, you don't go around firing guns, killing people. I think it's very different. And you don't work for terrorist organization, whatever some people would like to say that, but they're working for the government, for a government army, and they're not fighting.
Al Jazeera asked Torger Dahl about his own nationality.
Well, I don't know. If I'm put to test if I'm a Norwegian or Israeli, I don't know. Probably, I feel very Norwegian, but if they should need my help, I would do it.
It does sound a little bit strange that you are Norwegian, you're not Jewish. Oh, that's, can we talk about that? The fact is, a lot of people that do this are Jewish. You are not Jewish, so
And I don't want to talk about it.
Huh?
I don't want to talk about it. That's a no-no.
Okay. Which particular bit?
About me not being Jewish. Because that's a problem for me.
Okay, so but why do you
I've tried to convert, but didn't succeed. Because I'm married to a non-Jewish woman.
The chairman of the Carmel Institute and other leading members of that group, I asked them if not what they're doing is leading to escalating the conflict between Israel and Palestine. And they often replied to me that it actually does say in the Bible that there shall be conflict until Jesus comes back again and restores the peace. So it seems that in this understanding, whether or not you can lower the conflict for a period of time, it isn't really so important for them. They are aiming for something much further down the line than temporary peace.
Записатися в ряди військовослужбовців.
понимаете, да, что после того, как программа выйдет в эфир, это станет известно?
В крайнем случае, если тут что-то случится, могу уехать туда. У меня даже фамилии там разные. Здесь и там.
Да?
Да.
Внимание, вопрос. Ради того, чтобы не жить дома с родителями, вы готовы вернуться в армию и дальше убивать врагов?
Да.
Приходилось стрелять в детей?
Да.
Сколько людей вы убили?
Я не знаю.
The 2 years it took to research and make this film raised a number of important legal and ethical questions. Is the phenomenon of foreign nationals volunteering for the Israeli army a problem? If so, why? Is this kind of volunteering comparable with joining a Syrian opposition group in the civil war? But it's also important to ask why Israel and its supporters abroad go to all these lengths to engage with the Jewish diaspora through international organizations, networks, and support groups. Is it part of a wider kind of influence that Israel exercises in order to win and retain the hearts and minds not just of Jews worldwide, but of people of other ethnic, cultural, and religious backgrounds, wherever they may be?